Hello and welcome. It is Thursday, July 20th, and we want to catch up with some peer review that we missed out last round. For technical issues, I was unable to record the peer review on Tuesday, and now have things up and running a bit better. And so we're going to take the opportunity now to discuss some of the 2D platformer submissions. These are the video captures that you submitted last Sunday. You have now created all of the assets. So you've created the music, created the sound effects for 2D platformer. You have placed them into the game and tested everything out. Maybe needed another pass of revisions. Oftentimes once you get the music in the game and the sound effects, there might be some issues with how things play back correctly. Now that you get everything working in the game, you test it out, make any changes, then you've also done a video capture to show off the work that you have completed. There's no better way of showing off your audio in the your music and sound effects working better than actually playing them in the game. So we have, let's see, again, this is all from the week 2 optional feedback and peer review. So we have a couple of YouTube video submissions here. And now that you've gone through this whole process and completed everything with 2D platformer, you have basically navigated the steps to actually get the project completed, and you'll be doing that again for Angry Bots for our new game coming up this week. So let's go ahead and take a listen to our first one here. All right, so the first thing that I notice here is that it seems to have been recorded through the internal microphone on the computer and not through a program called Loopback. The assignment discusses using Loopback to digitally record the output of your game into the input of the QuickTime video. So that means instead it was recorded probably from the speaker on the computer back into the microphone. So it sounds thin, and you can kind of hear clicking in the background, and the audio quality changes. Like over here, I noticed there's like a big filter, which is probably like that right there. Probably from your hands cupping over the speaker. Alright, so overall, I think the sound effects work. It's kind of hard to judge like the mix and the quality of the music and the sound effects. So definitely get in contact if you need help with getting Loopback set up properly, because we want to make sure that we have the highest quality video capture that we can. Alright, let's check out the next one here. Yeah, so the audio quality of this one is correct. Let's take a listen here.
Oops. Not my cup of tea. Payback time. Ow! Yeah. I'm cheesed off with you.
transitions into the ending as well. All right. So, first off, the quality of just the video capture works out well, where it's just the game, no extra stuff either before or after. A lot of times you see people clicking around on their desktop and navigating through the program. As a solid mix of the music and sound effects. Get back over here where there's some action. Oh. Gunshot. Cool. I think the gunshot sound works well. Yeah, the overall mix of music and sound effects, often it is a question of which is louder, music or sound effects. Most of the time, sound effects provide the most information and detail of the story, and so sound effects are louder than music. Music often provides a subtext to that. But for our purposes, this is your music composer. You are showing off your music composition here, so often music might be a little bit louder. What else? So good quality of the video, good mix between music and sound effects. Intros and endings transition nicely. So I like the pitched up, also the pitched up voices of the characters. That works. Makes it unique. All right, let's try the next one here.
You numpty pants. So daft. Please hand grenades. You numpty pants. I'm still here.
Great endings.
Yeah. You numpty pants. Biscuits and hand grenades. I'm still here. Yeah. So daft. I'm still here.
All right. So, I think I really enjoyed the energy of the music. I think it works out very well for the pacing of this game. The lines of dialogue are great. All the dialogue in this game is often where the most entertainment comes in. So, and you can hear the voices pretty clearly. A lot of times, the gunshot ends up being too loud, and so maybe not even too loud, but just constantly playing as people are playing the game. And so that gunshot can often override and mask other elements, other sound effects, and even the music. Good quality capture.
So daft. I'm still here.
Get the health. There we go.
You numpty pants. Ouch.
Great. All right. So another good one, another good example. So yeah, it's not only the quality of your music and your sound effects and the mix and all the audio component, but you want to create as smooth of and as kind of clean and professional of a demo as possible. Because honestly, there's a chance that you may never touch this going forward, and you always want to have that video, like you will always have that video capture, and you want to, you will enjoy the fact that it is a professional video that you can show off down the road. It'll come very useful. All right, intense music here. Excellent.
Ooh. Good show. Whoop. 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 Ratio. Ooh. Good show. Use that more. Ooh. Whoop. Good show. Ow. Whoop. Rightio. He's that tall. Good show. Ooh. Rightio. Good show. Rightio. Good show. Rightio.
Cool. All right. So first off, the music is great. It works very well for especially the pizzicatos when it comes in here into the main loops. Works out very appropriately for this style of game. So one thing that I noticed as the video kept going on was that you're playing the game as if you're showing off the game itself and not the music. So I would, you do towards the end here go and just jump off the edge and we get to hear an ending, but I would make sure to die a couple of times to show off the ending and the intros starting up again, or else we just only get one view of those intros and endings. So that I would have look into, just kind of showing off more in the video.
Ooh. Good show.
The sound effects are heard easily against the music.
Good show. He's that tall. Good show.
Sometimes, I mean, some of those louder, more impactful sections of the music, it might mask it a little bit more overall against like the more quieter pizzicato parts, but overall I think it works out well.
Good show. Ooh. Rightio. Good show. Rightio.
All right. Maybe the gun could be a little bit. The gun sounds more like a pop gun or something like that. It could have a little bit more oomph to it, but it's a pretty small detail. All right, we're doing good. Continue on here. Let's try the next one.
Come on, lad. Take it easy. Come on, lad. Take it easy. Ow, ow. I said, okay. Come on, lad. Take it easy. Come on, lad.
Same thing here. I would show off the endings. Very good. Ask and you shall receive. Very good. Get to hear another intro and ending.
Take it easy. I said, good day. Take it easy.
All right. So the first thing that I hear with the sound effects is the lines of dialogue are hard panned either left or right. Catch that ending there. So, yeah, the lines of dialogue are either hard left or hard right, which makes me think you recorded your mono microphone and then bounced out a stereo file, and it just either occupies, that mono channel either now occupies either the left or the right. So you're going to need to make sure that the mono dialogue comes out as stereo for the game, which is putting it on a mono track and just leaving the panner at center, or sometimes you can like double the mono microphone in both the left and right channels, just like copy it and pan one left and one right. That could work also. So that was the first thing. I think the groove of the music works out very well.
Come on, lad. Yeah. Take it easy. Come on, lad. Take it easy. Ow, ow.
it is.
I said good day.
It's kind of hard to judge the mix of music and sound effects. Well, I mean, a lot of the sound effects are stereo, and I think those are fine. Like the gunshot.
Yeah.
Doesn't override the music too much. You can hear, it's just like the lines of dialogue, since they're panned hard left and hard right, or just in the left or right, then it becomes harder to tell the mix, because it's a lot easier to hear, it's just way over on one side. So those are the types of things to pay attention to. I think the content of what you have works. Like the music works, it transitions well. Let's catch another ending here. Let's just see another ending.
I said
intro.
good day. Take it easy.
Yeah, maybe less just playing the game and more just showing off. That was a nice jump.
Come on, lad.
Let's see, here we go. Yeah, and a nice ending. So, yeah, I think the content that you have works just fine. It's just more the formatting of it. All right, let's try one more here. Good ending. Cool. So I think it works mostly at one of the first things I noticed was the loudness of the dialogue. The dialogue was quite muffled or quite masked compared to the music and really the gunshot. Gunshots, well, actually, I think the gunshot and the music are more of the correct level and mix. It's just a lot of the enemy deaths and the taunts are quite low in volume. So just double check those. Yep, nice ending. Maybe a little too major on the ending. It's a little too heroic. Yeah, but the music works. Yeah, maybe music works overall. Sound effects works overall. Could just be the mix. And yeah, the video works. It's good quality. The same ending we get? No. It was a different ending. All right. So, great stuff to listen to overall. There, we talked about the quality of the video capture, making sure that it was just as clean, as professional as possible, with also making sure to use loopback to capture it digitally. You can hear the quality difference when using loopback. There's questions of the mix, where how loud the music needs to be against the sound effects, and that of course depends on the intensity of your music, plus the I guess the intensity of your a lot of the vocals and the dialogue that's recorded. You want to make sure you have a solid balance there. I would say that again, content-wise, the composition of the music, the fun entertainment of the sound effects, you guys hit that part. Most of the things we were talking about are game-specific things, not necessarily issues with the quality of the composition and the creativity of it. It is the mix, music and sound effects, which is a very common thing because music and sound effects are created completely separate from each other. So it's not until you put them together that you can identify any issues between those. And well, even the looping and the transition part was pretty smooth. So it was just, yeah, how do they work in the game, and how well is it presented? So those are the types of things we want to show off. Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to the archive now to provide the rest of the information. So I definitely wanted to catch up on the peer review here. Please contact me and let me know if you have any sort of questions. Thanks. All right, hello and welcome. It is the second class of week 3, and we are going to turn our attention to the process of how your music actually makes its way into the game. We're going to talk about the technical tools and workflow that is involved in getting your already pre-composed music functioning and interacting with the action and the gameplay happening in the game. So over the course of the month, we've discussed the basic components of an interactive game soundtrack. We talked about more of the creative aspects of how of different game genres and the history of the different audio consoles and what is possible with them. We talked about how you kind of dissect a game project and figure out what music you might need and how much music you might need, some of the tools that are available that you might interact with the game team and some of the materials that they may provide. How we talked about how do you start a composition from nothing and how do you format your tracks in a way that it actually works and makes sense in the game. So that by the time you reach the end of the composition, you have usable WAV files that can actually be plugged in and work with the game project. We talked about vertical and horizontal orchestration and arrangement of your tracks so that different types of games can use a different musical approach to complete the music soundtrack in the background behind the game action. We talked about the use of looping music, about stingers and one-shots, and we also were kind of discussing the overall process of how you go from the initial idea and start building your music. We've already worked with our 2D platformer game to see a bit of this process and actually getting your music into the game and testing it. So at some point in the project, your folder filled with completed accepted assets that were verified and signed off by the team. You have a folder filled with WAV files that gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. That your list of to fill out the different musical characteristics of this game gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so initially you start off with this big list of ideas and directions that you're going to head, and you work your way through and narrow those ideas down into what is actually going to be worked and workable and usable in the game. Then you start chipping away at all of those parts and start gathering the different components for your interactive music soundtrack. And you are working directly with the game team, or you're working remotely and sending off assets, and they're approved and verified, and well, they more than likely you don't hit it out of the park the first time every single time, and there's a process of revision, but eventually you land on the approved assets that need to actually find their way into the game. And so now here, more in the second half of the month, we'll talk about the technical process of how your music actually makes its way into the game, so that when a player has a controller in their hand, they hit a button or perform a certain action, they hear the correct piece of music playback, or they hear the correct sound effect playback. And we'll talk about some of the tools and the steps and the process that your WAV files and ultimately your music goes through to create the final interactive soundtrack and game that everybody ends up playing. So one of the best parts to start off with is that all the software that we are talking about today, all of the tools are free, available for you to download and test out. I highly encourage you to test out. We're going to talk about game engines and audio middleware. Game engines like the Unity game engine, which all of your games this month are built in. Also the Unreal game engine, which is another very, very popular piece of software to create games. We'll also talk about audio middleware tools like Fmod and Wise, which are some industry standard software to get music and sound effects playing back with all of the actions and interactivity in the game. So overall, the process that we are discussing is called implementation. Your music is implemented into the game. There is often a job or somebody's role in game development where they implement music and sound effects into the game. They are an implementer. When I talk about this process of how your music makes its way into the game, I like to relate it back to ideas and concepts that you're already familiar with in music production. And I like to relate the idea of implementation to the concept of mixing music for either a song or an album. The mixing is the process after the recording session. Well, maybe they might kind of mix a little bit, but there's typically steps of composition, recording, mixing, maybe mastering. And in the mixing process, let's talk about on the big, large-scale professional side of things with recording studios and budgets and all that sort of stuff. There is a mixing process where you've taken tracks and music that has already been composed and recorded, and the entire job of the recording process is to capture the best performance. And you end up with a recording session that has multiple different tracks for drums, bass, guitar, brass, strings, vocals, whatever the combination is. So the mixing session takes over where you have, 10 or 20 or 100 tracks to mix down to typically a final 2-track stereo master that's then streamed off the internet or put on iTunes or put on a disc and sold around the world. So mixing is the process of taking already pre-composed elements, pre-recorded, and doing something to them, typically on a mixing board or DAW software, using volume and pan and EQs and filters and processors, reverbs and delays and distortions, and there's all sorts of using automation and all sorts of tricks and steps in the process of mixing. And mixing is not just one thing. It's not just one piece of software. It's not just one step or series of steps. If we all went into the same recording studio with the same piece of music, we would all come out with different mixes, slightly different mixes or very different mixes. Even given the same set of tools, we would turn the knobs differently, hit the buttons differently, do things in different orders, and come out with a different result. None of them necessarily being right or wrong in any sort of way. So, and certainly that should be a concept that you have some familiarity with and understanding of. And so then we're going to relate that idea of mixing over to implementation. So implementation is the process of getting your music and sound effects into the game. In some of the same similar concepts of mixing, it is not the creation, it's not the composition of the music, it's not the sound design. All of that stuff is done ahead of time. And you take hundreds, if not thousands of files, typically over time, and crafting them into a final stereo mix or surround mix that anyone who plays the game ultimately hears. And so it's taking a lot of raw elements, or in some stage of completed audio files, and doing something to them in the game with pieces of software to connect them to the game. And again, implementation is not just one piece of software. It's not just one series of steps or workflow that everybody follows. It's a process. It's an art. It's often thought of as half of the process of actually making music work in the game, meaning that, or the responsibility of making it sound beautiful and amazing in a game. Half of that is the actual composition itself, but wonderfully composed music, poorly implemented into a game, is going to result in a bad soundtrack for your game. Same way that a beautiful recording that is mixed poorly is going to ultimately end up with a bad sounding piece of music. So in this process of getting your music in the game, there are steps in software that we will discuss in getting all of this to work together. So as a music composer, you know this world over here. This is the world of the DAW. This is the world of music theory and composition. This is the creation and production of the music soundtrack for the game. And this is our domain. This is where we are most familiar and most comfortable, and the main reason that the game team hires us, because they have no clue how to write a note of music or create an amazing soundtrack. So we're certainly familiar with this side of the equation. And over here on the right side, this is the game itself. And honestly, we're familiar with this part too, because at least conceptually, we have to understand what's going to happen in the game to be able to write music for it. So 2D platformer, you certainly understood the idea of their music is going to be divided up into intros, main loops, and endings. That there are going to be 3 variations of each one of those. That totals out to 9 files. And those files are going to be shuffled around in any different order so that they can make a continuous but still varying and random soundtrack. And there needed to be consistency in that composition with tempo and key and progression and style and instrumentation, so that it felt like a linear composition even though it was made up from little pieces and parts. So again, conceptually, we understand what's supposed to happen in the game. We can play the game, we can creatively make decisions about the game, which influences our composition over here. But really, it's these arrows in between of how do we actually get our WAV files over to the game. I can constantly throw my WAV files at the game, but nothing happens. It's not until we understand the process of implementation to understand kind of the workflow behind all of it. So what we're doing here is setting up the interactive behavior assigned to the music mix. So the composition is done, the music is done, but how does the music interact to the actions going on screen? How does it loop and randomize? How does it transition? Is everything going to hard cut from one thing to the next, or is it going to crossfade, or is it going to be in sync and in time with anything? Does that even matter for our particular game? These are the ideas and questions and creativity that's involved in making a strong interactive music mix. And again, we use different software tools to make all of this happen. And so we're going to start talking about some of the tools that take your music from a folder filled with WAV files, because ultimately that's often what you end up with, right? You work all through your amazing production session. You make amazing music in your DAW, and you bounce it out, and you end up with a WAV file. And as you've seen over the course of our projects, that a game soundtrack is made up of a whole bunch of individual WAV files that something happens to them to end up creating what seems like a linear soundtrack. So The one of the first tools that we will discuss here is audio middleware. And so audio middleware is software that is in between you and the code. So we as music composers and sound designers and general audio folks, we don't know code just as much as all of the visual folks don't know code. The graphic artists, 2D art and 3D art and animation and textures and motion capture and all of the amazing graphics that we see in games. They are artists and designers just as much as we are. And they don't know code because they've spent their life working on a specific discipline in the arts, visual arts or audio arts or music. So was very obvious quite early on that your best programmers are not going to be your best musicians, or even any of your programmers. Your programmers can't write music just as much as your musicians can't write code. And in the beginning or dawn of games, for quite a while, games and game music was explicitly done through code. I mean, the music was created. It was if you go all the way back to the original Nintendo, it was synthesized and it was literally code generating the soundtrack or the music to Super Mario Brothers that you hear. Later on, it was pre-recorded WAV files, but it was still started and stopped and triggered by code itself. And it became very obvious that your best musicians were not going to write your best code or even any code at all. And there needed to be some way of taking these two disciplines and connecting them together to make this process easier for both sides. And so middleware has become a very important tool for all sorts of different disciplines that are creating assets and content for these games. So there is middleware for audio and sound effects and music. There's middleware for graphics, animation, physics, networking, pretty much any aspect of game design has software and tools that are used to make that process a whole lot easier. And when we talk specifically about audio middleware, again, I like to relate it back to concepts and ideas in music production that we're already familiar with. I like to connect the idea in a very, very loose way, the idea that a audio middleware can be thought of in the same way as a plugin for your DAW, meaning that your audio middleware allows you to do and interact with your audio in a way that makes the process either easier or it sounds better or you can do stuff that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, just like a plugin in your DAW. There's all sorts of reasons that we use plugins, but your DAW by itself, whether it's Logic or Pro Tools or Ableton or Reaper or Cubase or whatever you're using, that tool can probably do to record your next song or to record your next album. It could probably do 80 or 90 or even 100% of everything that you need to accomplish to create your next piece of music. But there are a whole lot of reasons that we use plugins. Plugins extend the functionality of your DAW and allows you to do stuff better or faster. I mean, it sounds better, or it allows you to do things more efficiently, allows you to do stuff your DAW by itself could not do. And so much in the same way, audio middleware extends the audio functionality of your game and allows it to do stuff that it otherwise wouldn't be able to do, or it does it faster or more efficiently overall. So audio middleware, in a, again, very general, loose way, could be thought of similar to a plugin for your DAW. And two of the most popular audio middleware tools out there are Fmod and Wise. And this is kind of like saying Pro Tools or Logic. Well, I guess no, that's not the right way of saying it because that's DAW itself. This is like saying Waves or Native Instruments or something like that, where they're very, very popular tools that allow you to enhance the functionality of your DAW. And again, all of these tools are available free to download. If you check out a lot of different game audio job opportunities, they often mention tools like Fmod and Wise. And we'll check out some of their websites here in just a moment, but you'll see that they often advertise the fact that they have been used in lots and lots of different types of games. So, audio middleware, like we said, is software that's in between you and the code. We know music, we know sound, we don't know code, but we need to be able to do something with it in order to make it work for our specific uses. Also in a kind of a very loose way, we don't need to think about using logic this way, but ultimately it is really just code in the background. The software that you are using, when you place audio on a track and you mute a track or you use a fader or you add a plugin, really all you're doing is manipulating code in the background. If you thought about it, if you think about it too hard, it doesn't. It's not necessary because we don't actually interact with the computer that way. We actually use a graphic piece of software to interact with it. But if you peel away the layers of it, ultimately, when you're moving a fader around, it's just changing code in the background. It's just an interface that allows you to tell the computer exactly what you want it to do. And Fmod and Wise can be thought of much in the same way. It comes in two flavors. It comes in two parts to the same package. One side is all of the code, and it is what the programmers use to plug it into the game and allow you to have extra functionality overall. And then there is a graphic, what's often known as an authoring tool that kind of sort of feels like a DAW, that allows you to that allows you to control and manipulate how this music is playing in the background. And I say not record because all of the content has been recorded and composed and created ahead of time. So ultimately, it takes your audio and puts it in a format that the different computers can read. So a PlayStation speaks a completely different audio language than an Xbox versus a Nintendo versus a PC versus a Mac. They're all proprietary technology. I mean, it's all based off of similar stuff, but they can use different file formats. They can certainly use different code languages, and they are ultimately intentionally set up so they don't really communicate. They don't talk to each other too much. Or it's not the same technology running on both sides. Probably a better way of saying it. So these tools are almost like a translator that allows you to set up your audio once and make it work on lots of different systems, on all the different gaming platforms out there. Before these sorts of tools existed, if you wanted to move a game from Mac to PC or from PC to PlayStation or an Xbox, well, Xbox was a little bit easier because it was all Microsoft, but to a Nintendo or something like that, then it had to be completely reprogrammed. All of the audio had to be converted, and it was much more of a process to make it work on multiple systems. And so, at least from the audio standpoint, tools like audio middleware here allows us to set up our audio once and have it work on multiple different places. So here are a couple of ideas about what middleware actually does for us. Some of the techniques that are useful in you designing your music and sound for the game. And you should probably recognize a lot of this stuff because we have been using it to some extent in our game projects. So, how do you tell the computer how to transition between different musical themes and loops? Ultimately, you are going to give the computer a folder filled with WAV files, which you already know because you have taken your completed audio files and you go to the 2D platformer game application and you right click and you do show package contents and you navigate to a certain folder and you dump your files there. Then next time you run the game, your music magically works. And that is because the game is constantly looking in that folder and you've told it, or when the game was created, it was told what to do with those files. So this way, the game knows that there are supposed to be 3 intro files, 3 main loops, 3 endings. You're going to randomly choose one of the intro files and then go into the main loops. And then constantly switch and rotate around, shuffle around those main loops until you lose all of your health points. Once that happens, then you're going to transition into the ending. So those ideas of where do I start? How long do I play? How do I play the next file? Going from one piece of music to the next. Do I just hard cut from one to the next? Do I crossfade? Do I wait for some bar or beat where it musically makes sense to transfer? Then you kind of add that up over a game experience that happens over 10 or 20 hours, and there is a lot of control and decisions that have to be made about how the music is going to actually play back. Yes, we've composed it, but it's not just playing from beginning to end. So what are we doing with it? Organizing the assets. By the end of a reasonably sized game, you will end up with thousands, tens of thousands. Bigger games get, well, I won't say hundreds of thousands. That's a little much. But many tens of thousands of audio files and minutes, if not hours, worth of game music. You need to, and they're especially the sound effects, are a whole bunch of little tiny files. So you can organize this in some sort of way. You need to have some sort of folder structure. You need to have some sort of approach to organizing everything so it's more easily manageable. And middleware gives you the tools to kind of organize it so that you can say things like, these are all the sounds for this character, and these are all the sounds for this weapon, and this is all the sounds for this level 1, level 2, level 3. And then they can load up and are available as necessary. So it's like loading up a new session. You don't need to have everything loaded up on your computer all the time. You load up a session, it tells you what files you need, and there you go. Game loads up, says load level 1, and the computer hands it all of the level 1 audio files. You can develop a simple looping ambience. We have already found that looping files are very important in our game music. It allows us to musically sit in one place before we transition on to somewhere else. So we can determine, does a file loop? Does it play one time? If it loops, how many times does it loop? So randomized stingers. Well, so we have looping music. We also have random music, or the randomization to provide a little bit of variation to our music. And we can say, how are things random? Do they play in sequence? Do they play in random order? Are they shuffled? Can I play the same sound over again? How long do I have to wait until I can play that sound again? These are all sorts of considerations in how the music is going to play. Real-time audio effects and processing. During gameplay, while the game is actually running, this is probably most of what your game is doing with your audio, is mixing it in real time, mostly changing the volume and pan to determine how loud something is and where it's located around you. Effectively, lots of games use it or handle it differently, but let's just say very simply it would take the top 100 sounds around you and determine how close or far they are away from you, and where in 360 degrees around you that sound exists. And then appropriately mix it and pan it for all the sounds that are heard in the game at any one moment. Gives you the opportunity to test your events in a prototyping environment. You can test how things are supposed to work before they're actually put into the game. Very commonly, it's going to be a day or a week or a month or who knows how long it will take before from the point when you deliver the audio file to it actually makes its way into the game. Ultimately, you are probably not the person who is actually putting that file into the game. It's left up to somebody else. And so they have to receive your submission, they have to put it into the game and then send it back to you somehow. And often game teams are, this is necessary for everybody, so they're very, very good about this. Either give you the means to test it out locally on your computer, or every couple of days they'll release a version of the game that everybody can test out. And then ultimately allows implementation of your audio into the game. That's really what it's there for. It allows you to set up the interactive behaviors. How is music going to play? How is it going to loop and transition and mix when ultimately it's the computer controlling everything. It's not we don't have direct control over everybody playing that game. So we have to create a interactive mix that allows for those changes to happen. So I'm going to take a quick pause here before we get into our next topic and kind of identify more details about how elements of audio middleware works. Hold on just a sec. I'll come back in just a few. All right. So, as I mentioned, one of the main things that your game is doing in real time is mixing the volume and pan. One of the most basic components of an audio mix is volume and pan, right? Whenever you're working on music, everything that you add and subtract and EQ and add an effect to, you're constantly going back to your volume and pan to adjust everything. And one of the big challenges in game audio is that you don't know what's going to happen at any one time, and so you cannot necessarily prepare the mix for it. So often what you do is create boundaries of your mix, create minimum and maximum values where no sound is ever going to get any louder than this value, and it's never going to get any lower than this, which is typically silence. So it'll either go from complete silence up to ever being this loud, whatever that value is. And then the game can control the volume by different parameters that are happening in the game at that time. And one of the most common ways that volume is perceived in the game is over distance. If you need to create the sense that a sound is getting closer or farther away from you, volume is the main way to go. It's typically a combination of volume and low pass filter, so it rolls off the highs. It seems a little bit more muffled, but it seems like it more from a distance. So volume is often attached to distance, or that's how you create the sense of scale and size and distance in the game. And then the other aspect is panning. How does it know where anything is positioned in the real world, or not in the real world, in the game world. And the answer is it's the computer, and it is constantly in control of the game world. And so it constantly knows where you are and where all of the sounds are in respect to your position. So it always knows in which direction you're looking, even if you're turning around, and it knows where those other sounds exist in the game world. So a mile off, an explosion happened in our game, and so we hear it from the right, and the volume is reduced and a little bit muffled to create the sense of distance, and you can kind of pinpoint it, or spatialize it to a location and head off in that direction. So, as I said, the game pulls the closest however many sounds around you, figures out their importance of how necessary is it to be as a component of a mix, right? If you have a firefight going on and you have 10 players all in an area launching off the loud rockets and explosions and weapons, you don't necessarily need to hear every single one of their footsteps. And so it makes decisions on importance of sounds and proximity of sounds and what is the most important sounds that you hear in any one time. And then it adjusts their volume and panning accordingly. And it does this at 30 or 60 times per second. However fast the game is updating. I mentioned previously that games work off of frame rates, and the faster the frame rate of the game, the smoother the action, smoother the overall mix can be. And so at this quick pace, it is determining every sound that needs to be changed and adjusting the mix accordingly. So we have variable volume, we have variable pan, but as I mentioned, you might have large periods of time where there's lots of sounds going off at the same time. So, and then you also have periods of time where there's very little sound. And how are you going to create a mix when you don't know what's going to happen, and it's going to go back and forth between the loudest grouping of sounds that you've ever heard in the game and a relatively quiet, less action-based part of the game. And ultimately, to control your overall dynamic range and the overall be able to control the volume mix, dynamics processors are put into effect during gameplay, where you have compressors and limiters that can control groups of audio signals and adjust the mix accordingly. So here we have what looks like a bit of a signal flow, or it's mostly like how stems and groups of sounds are kind of routed together ultimately to go out the main output. So up here, the main output would be the output of your PlayStation, your Xbox, or your computer. Right before that, there's often a limiter. And this is to prevent some random game blowing up a consumer speaker system, like the general public's speakers, right? Whenever Sony or Microsoft releases a game for their game console, they check that game because it's made by other developers, and they want to make sure that that game is going to operate as promised on their gaming hardware. And so one of their certifications that they do for their games is to make sure that it doesn't overload and produce too much signal to create issues with somebody's audio system. So there's a limiter that's often a kind of a brick wall limiter that says, okay, you can't go past 0 here. This is the final stop. And this limiter you never really want to touch either. You are going to make sure that all of the audio as it's mixed before that levels properly so that it doesn't overload the master. So we got a master bus that's fed by dialogue, sound effects, and music. Each one of those has a compressor Notice that there isn't much involved with the music because the music is all kind of taken care of by the composer, and there's like the mix is already done. And most of what the game has to do with the music is just play back the right file at the right time. There is a compressor on the music. It's not really there for the mix. It's there. Notice it has a side chain, so side chain from the dialogue. Critical dialogue, things that are absolutely important, if necessary, can duck down the music to make room for that dialogue. It's a very common approach. Then dialogue might be split out to critical and non-critical dialogue. Sound effects are broken out into lots of different categories: weapons, ambience, vehicles, objects, explosions. Notice explosions has its own limiter so that you don't explode too much and cause issues. Things like vehicles spread out to or split out to engines, vehicle impacts, and skids. Vehicle impacts has its own limiter. So certain things that can cause havoc to the mix have their own control. So you have real-time processors, dynamics processors, limiters. These things allow you to have some semblance of your overall mix and put either brick walls or soft walls that allow you to head up to a level but not go over. If there are real-time dynamics processors, that also means that there are real-time time-based processors. These are relatively newer to the industry, the past 10 years or so, where you have similar types of effects processing that you might get in your DAW. So we have things like reverbs and EQs and distortions and delays that give you a lot of environmental effects. So you could have a reverb that gives you a sense that you're in a big airplane hangar versus a small wood hallway, or now you walk outside and there's little to no reverb. Different approaches, and third-party plugin developers are starting to create plugins for these tools. Isotope, Waves, let's see, actually right here. These are popular plugin manufacturers that are also finding clients in the games industry. One of the first was the Waves plugins that were built for the Xbox 360. It's the same processor. They built the C4 compressor, the Q10 EQ, the Renaissance Reverb, and they built them as plugins that could run on the processor of the Xbox. And this allowed them to go into the DAW and set up their plugin, save a preset, and then dump it into the Xbox so that the next time they run the game, they can turn it on and off as needed. So WaveArts, McDSP, Isotope, traditionally and still audio, they mostly serve the music industry, but they are also finding clients in the games industry. Hold on real quick. So let's take a moment here to talk specifically about two audio tools, audio middleware tools, Fmod Studio and Wise. And Fmod has been around for quite a while, maybe about 15, 20 years by now, which is an eternity in the game world. But they're developed by Firelight Technologies. They are based out of Sydney, Australia. You'll see this is very common, all the different platforms, Xbox, PlayStation, that's actually updated to the Switch now, Wii U, Mac, PC, iOS, Android, a lot of different platforms. Pretty much, again, wherever you want your game to be released, they have a set of tools that works for that particular system. And it's the same tool. It just, on the front end, it looks like the same graphics tool for everybody. But on the back end, it speaks all the different languages for the different gaming consoles. So let me actually jump to, let's see. Hello, mouse. Let's check this out. This is Fmod. fmod.com. And these are all of the tools that are, or just some insight into some of the tools that are available. Some videos and some games that you can check out. Let's see, if we go to download here. Excuse me. If you go to download, you can download Fmod Studio Tool. Here's the Macintosh version. And you can check it out, and it looks something like this. So let me load up a project here. Did I do that? There it goes. And bring it back. What you might notice here, let's bring something up, is that it doesn't look too different from a DAW. Yes, it certainly looks different, but there are certain characteristics that can feel quite familiar to an audio developer. You have things that look like tracks, you have things that look like regions, you have solos and mutes and knobs and buttons and sliders. You have a surround panner. There's an organizational structure over here. You can zoom in and out of your tracks. You have different timelines. So there are some looks and characteristics to it that would feel familiar to a music composer or an audio developer. And that's the market that they're going after. And so they're trying to create tools that are that somebody can really work with, and that they don't have to take too much of a learning curve to jump into these tools. So you would you'd have to have a discussion with the game developer to get a sense of whether they want to use these tools. They are free for non-commercial and educational purposes, but eventually they can become quite expensive overall for a full development game. But those games are typically running in the millions of dollars of development costs. So let's bring up a music track here. Show you what's happening. All right, so you see things like rest. This says low, medium, high, end. And there's a wave file in here, and there's a whole bunch of yellow lines, and those represent bars or beats of where the music can actually transition. Basically, all of those are different exit ramps for the music so that you can transition from one piece of music to the next. It allows you to determine where you want the transition to start and where you want the transition to end. And the music can switch and change. Zoom in here so you can see a little bit more of the music. You'll see that they are all on beat and downbeats. And there are values up here of an intensity of your music. As the intensity increases, the music also increases. We got low, medium, and high. This is a lower intensity, medium intensity, and high intensity music. And as soon as it goes to medium or high, it'll wait till the next logical point, which is only a few beats away, before it transitions into the next phase of the music. So what you can pick up from here is that it's not that unfamiliar to a music composer. It's not all that outside of the realm of possibility that you might understand and start working with these tools. I definitely encourage because it's very much like handing your music over to somebody else to mix. If you never touch any of these tools and you never get an understanding of what's happening in the background, then what you will be doing is delivering your WAV files. You'll put them on Dropbox and deliver them that way. You'll throw them up on a FTP. However you would ultimately deliver the files, and then a programmer would take those and again do something with them in the code to make them work. And then it's like somebody else mixing your music. They would do stuff. They are not musicians. They don't necessarily know how the music is going to transition. So you want the ability to have tools like this to control exactly how things are going to sound. You end up getting much better results if you give these sorts of tools to the music composers and developers to get an improved end result. So just a couple of screenshots about Fmod and what it can do for you. A tool used for authoring interactive music and events, used by sound designers and composers. Again, tracks, solos, mutes, faders, knobs, very identifiable actions for music. So they have a lot of pretty big name games out there. However, a lot of game developers have been switching to Wise. Blizzard now makes Overwatch, which is switched over to Wise. The Batman series switched over to Wise. BioShock switched to Wise. But a lot of car games end up using Fmod Studio because of its ability to do engines, car engines, motorcycle engines. Is a pretty powerful tool. Let's go back over. Where am I? I need to. Where'd my other tab go? Did I close it? Nope. Find it. Hold on. So, like I said, you go to download here. You could download Fmod Studio authoring tool. This is all the Fmod Studio Programmers API and low-level programmer API. This is all of the code. You don't need to download that, but you can see all of the different gaming software, gaming hardware that the Fmod works on. Plugins. There's a mastering limiter, audio gaming weather, allows you to synthesize weather effects, audio gaming motors, allows you to synthesize vehicle effects, and actually works and integrates with Fmod Studio, with Unreal and Unity. So there's a lot of games that you can get that actually utilize your, that can actually use, that you can rip out all of the sound effects and music from it and put in your own custom sound effects and music. Simple pricing, free for us, free for free for educational purposes, non-commercial reasons, even up to $500,000 in the budget. It's free for one game per year. But beyond that, then if you get to be a bigger developer and you're making a lot more money off of your games, this is where they actually keep their business going. For anything over $500,000, it's $5,000 for Fmod. Anything over $1.5 million, it's $15,000. So this was the original price, or even a little bit more than that. But $15,000 or more is the full price for this software. But they do have multiple different platforms for different types of games. We saw Fmod Studio API. That gets us into the next one here, Wise. Wise is developed by Audio Kinetic. They're based out of Canada. Again, they're available on all the different platforms, Xbox, PlayStation, PC, Mac, iOS, and Android. Here is their website. And you can go to download Wise. Maybe. There it is. And let's see, download Wise. You can download it. You download the Mac version. And let's see. I've always thought that Audio Kinetic is a little bit newer to the game. I mean, it's still been around for a little while, 7-8 years. And have always thought that they watched what Fmod was doing and then just did it cooler and better. Like they did everything that Fmod was doing and then added some extra functionality. And a lot of these games, very very popular games, have been used Wise to create all of their audio. Right, the Assassin's Creed series, the Batman series, the BioShock and Borderlands series of games. Depth, that's the game I'm working on. Destiny. What else is out there? Just lots and lots of games that are extremely popular and use the Wise tool set, which is why you see a lot of these companies asking for skills and requiring skills in understanding some of these tools along with the actual composition. So we got download, we got customers. Let me load up Wise here. And it's, I've always thought it's not as pretty as Fmod. That is one thing that Fmod has going for it, is that it looks a whole lot better. Let's see here. Hold on. It's loading up. There it is. So Wise is a little bit more gray overall, but you have the ability to set up the characteristics of the sound and how they play back. Something that looks like all of this over here. You have the ability to build curves like this. Let's do this. Build different curves for the how the audio is playing back. Volume, reverbs. You can do. You can connect to the game and watch how the game plays back in real time. There is the mixer where you can take let's see here. Let me get something that'll work. Oh, I guess this. Oh, there we go. There we go. Do stuff like this. There we go. And you can actually have a real-time mixer for sounds in your game. There's a meter over here. There's a surround panner. And there's all sorts of different controls that you have to the sounds. So, like a lot of things, it's not very pretty, but it's certainly extremely powerful in its capability. This is mainly the tool that I use for the game projects that I'm working on. It's a very popular tool set out there, and there are a lot of like tutorials and game projects that you can use to create your own kind of demo and showing off your skills in these tools. So they're based out of Canada, Audiokinetic, based out of Canada. All the different platforms that are available. We saw a lot of different games that are available for and used the Wise system. The Wise Designer, that's the software that I was showing. Again, it has things that look like crossfades. We've got a transport down here. You got faders and menus and inserts and solos and pans and aux sends, and this over here looks like a busing structure. It's kind of like stems and how things are going to mix together. Here's your surround panner. There's all sorts of familiar tools for audio developers, but a specific function for it in the game itself. All right, and so our last topic here, we want to discuss the main tool that is used to create games, known as game engines. So previously, when I said that or compared a previously when I compared the audio middleware to a plugin for your DAW, I said audio middleware extends the functionality of the audio for your game just in the same way that a plugin extends the functionality of audio for your DAW. So if audio middleware is like a plugin, then your game engine is like the actual DAW, meaning it's the main tool that you use to make your game. Just in the same way that your DAW is your main tool that you use to make your music. And game engines come in different flavors. Different companies have their own technology. Some of them are quite popular and well known. Others are very small and independent. It used to be that a new game engine was written for every single game. Maybe only if it was a sequel would they use some of the same stuff, but a lot of times it was written from scratch every single time. But that certainly wasn't the way to go about it. And so different companies started to create tools that were general enough to do all sorts of different types of games. It didn't have to be just a racing game or a cards game or a puzzle game or a first-person shooter game or action or adventure or whatever. They could make tools that were general enough to make all sorts of different types of games. And so a game engine is a tool set. It's like a toolbox of different pieces of software that people use to make games. And there are tools for the graphics, there's tools for the programming, there's tools for the animation and physics and how things actually look and perform in the game. And then there are tools for the audio and sound. And so everybody is using a similar set of tools to accomplish the project. So your choice of game engine is very, very important, just in the same way that when you're recording your music or writing a piece of music or whatever, your choice of DAW is very important. Often it's a personal choice of what tool you feel most comfortable using. But if you're working on a larger professional project, you have to make sure that everybody is comfortable using Pro Tools or Logic or whatever DAW you are using. Same thing goes with a game engine, but you could easily have 10 or 50 or 100 or even 1,000 people or more working on a game project using the same set of tools. So picture if 1,000 people had to get into the same Logic session, how much of a nightmare that could be. So these tools often are set up also so that a lot of different people can get in and work on their little section of the game to create the final result. And so game engines often come in two different parts, just like middleware. There's all of the code that the programmers can use to create the games. And there certainly are programmers out there that can start from a blank text file and start pounding away at the code until they end up with some semblance of a game. And most programmers and most game designers don't want to start at that level. They don't want to have to reinvent the wheel from scratch every single time. When you want to create a game, you don't want to have to reinvent how to draw a pixel on the screen or how to have the mouse and the keyboard and a game controller work, how to connect to the internet and do a multiplayer game. Those are sets of tools that already exist, right? If it's not like whenever I want to go build my house, I don't want to have to reinvent the concept of a hammer and nail every single time. They already exist. I can go to a store and buy hammers and nails and all of the other materials that I need and go build my house. Same thing goes with a game developer. They don't want to have to reinvent the concept of a hammer and nail just to build their game. There are tools out there that other companies have created to allow companies to build the games. Most game designers, all they really want to do is tell a great story, create amazing characters, create great graphics and audio and design, and tie it all together with powerful tools in the background. And so different game companies like the Epic Games. Epic Games makes the Unreal game engine. Unreal games have been around for a very long time. Since the late 90s, the Unreal games have been very popular. Unreal, Unreal 2, Unreal 3, Unreal Tournament 2013 and 27. I don't know. There's all sorts of different ones. And they also made the Gears of War series, a game called Bulletstorm. And if you make a game, you have to spend all of your time and money and efforts in making an awesome game, and then you have to turn around and sell it to everybody. But if you realize, a lot of these companies realized that they had the tools that they could sell to other folks to make amazing games. And then they didn't have the risk of selling that game. They could just sell the tools and make their money that way. And so that's what a lot of game companies have done. Other popular game engines are, the Unity game engine, which all of our games are made in, and a lot of mobile games are made in the Unity game engine. The Unreal game engine, which you might already be familiar with. If you play a lot of games, often you see the logo that pops up on screen. What else? The Valve, game company Valve, has the Source engine, which makes a lot of their games. Team Fortress and Left 4 Dead and Half-Life and Portal and some other awesome games. Electronic Arts has the Frostbite engine, which came from Battlefield. Call of Duty and Activision has the Call of Duty engine, which is based off of an older version of Doom and Quake, which is also an extremely popular engine for quite a while. So a lot of these companies have gone on to make their own set of tools. And those tools come with all of the code that the programmers use to make the game, and often something called a world editor or a level editor, some visual graphic interface that all of the graphics folks and all of the audio and sound people can get into and actually see everything. So there's somebody who goes in and paints the sand, and there's somebody who goes in and plants all of the foliage and trees. Somebody animates the water to lap up on the beach and the birds to fly overhead. A lot of these icons represent sounds in the game world, where since sounds aren't physical, and well, they are physical, but they're not visual. You can't see them. They put an icon in the center of that sound and often create a sphere around that to display where the sound emanates. So game engines are not just for audio. They are an entire toolbox for all sorts of different disciplines. Most of what the game is doing in real time is generating the graphics. That's mostly what takes up all of your processing power. When your computer starts sweating playing a game, that's really what it's churning away at, because the graphics don't exist in their final form until somebody actually plays the game. So they are rendered in real time to create the visuals that you see on screen. So a lot of what the game engine is doing for you is creating amazing graphics, because graphics sell the game, and everybody is amazed by games because of how their graphics look. And so a lot of time and effort is put into that side. There's the gameplay. Gameplay is, how does the game actually play? What are you doing? How do you control it? How do you run and punch and jump? And how do you go through the levels? And what are the objectives? And what's the story? And what's the actual game? If you turned off the TV and turned off the sound, well, you really couldn't play the game, but what's there? What's actually, what are you doing? Networking. The fact that your computer can talk to many different computers across the world almost in real time to play a video game is an amazing feat in technology. But that technology already exists. The internet already exists. How one computer talks to another already exists. You don't need to reinvent that. You just take the tools that are available and apply it to your own game. Physics and AI are whole fields of scientific study that game teams cannot, again, reinvent the wheel. They don't employ scientists that study artificial intelligence or study physical nature of our universe to determine how things fall and blow up and run and jump. And so these sorts of things come in the box, are a set of tools that allow you to perform all of these actions. And probably rightfully so, audio gets a pretty small sliver of what the game engine is actually providing for us. And that's really because all of the heavy lifting has been done by the composer and the sound designer ahead of time. The music and dialogue and the sound effects are really the most real components of the game. The music has to be composed and is often recorded, performed by acoustic instruments, performed by live musicians. The sound design is recordings of real cars and real weapons, and the dialogue is from a real human. So the computer doesn't need to generate all that stuff. Audio exists separately from the game and is then implemented into the game versus the graphics. The graphics don't actually exist until the game is played and rendered. And so mostly what the game is doing with your audio is making sure it's playing the right file at the right time. So two of the most popular game engines out there are the Unity game engine and the Unreal game engine. And if you play a lot of mobile games, web-based games, the Unity game engine really became popular in this space. Game technology for a very long time was really quite expensive. We'll see that the Unreal game engine could go upwards of $500,000 or originally even $1 million just for the software to play your game or to create your game. And that meant there was a whole lot of developers that were never getting access to the best technology. And then the internet comes along and mobile gaming and mobile devices come along, and there's all of a sudden this new a new market out there for smaller games to be able to be digitally distributed. So they didn't need publishers. They didn't need a box or a physical media to put on a store shelf. They could make their games in their bedrooms and distribute them and have international distribution through things like iTunes and the iOS App Store and Google Play Store and Steam. These are online game stores that allow people to purchase their product. And that meant there are games like Angry Birds that came out of nowhere and makes millions upon millions of dollars that the other game companies were not getting involved in, like the game tools. It's like if Avid with Pro Tools never left the high-end recording studio market and never ever tried. This happened in audio too, right? Audio recording was pretty much the world of high-end studios that cost a whole bunch of money. And so tape recorders and hardware effects racks and eventually DAW computer-based recording software cost lots and lots of money. And then computers got faster and cheaper and smaller, and audio production went into people's home studios. And now all the software and hardware that had to be only sold and marketed to the biggest and largest and most expensive studios now had this whole new market that they had to address, and smaller independent producers. Same thing goes with games. It shifted from only the big $1 million games into smaller independent developers, and that's where Unity came in to fill this space. The Unity game software, they're based out of San Francisco, and it costs $1,500 or $75 per month. And let me just, here's their site. And let me just, we might change their pricing here. What do we do? Get Unity now. So you go to unity3d.com. Is that where I started? Yeah. Unity3d.com. and you could get the free version of it. Download this. This is what all of our 2D platformer, Angry Bots, everything was made in the free version of Unity. And see, they have different price points for the different services. Like all these Plus, Pro, and Enterprise, you don't need that for audio demo work. Only if you were making a really big professional, probably online multiplayer game, would you need some of that support. So you could download this software and get access to all sorts of games. One very cool thing that they have is the asset store here. And you can download different assets, different projects. They have Unity Essentials down here. And this is where 2D platformer is, but there are all sorts of interesting games. Survival shooter, space shooter, tanks. What else is cool on here? The adventure game. Where's the village? Viking Village. So these are all sorts of different games. We saw this actually on the Fmod website because you can use Unity and Fmod together. It talks about how to take this game and work together with it through Fmod. Here's a space shooter type of game that has really kind of cool graphics. It's like a 2D space, like, I don't know, Space Invaders or I want to say Missile Command. What am I? Space Invaders. I guess that's the only one I'm thinking of. Tanks. A small little desert tank shooter. Adventure game. This one looks pretty cool. I was kind of thinking about doing this it's like brand new. It just got released like, I don't know, quite recently. Yeah, December 21st. So I've thought about bringing this into the class. It's kind of short, but it's definitely a fun little game project. Viking Village. This is another very cool one here. It's like it's a Viking village. It's a gorgeous environment to have and display different elements of music. So, really cool projects that you can check out. The other cool aspect about this is that there's a music and sound. There's an audio section and a music section. And there's all sorts of different people selling packs of music for different prices. So you could see, okay, here's 8-bit action music. What are they selling for 50 tracks for $40 that they can sell? And certainly it is a non-exclusive agreement because you're selling it on an asset store. But it's a great way of passive income. Where if you have tracks, you're just constantly writing music, and you can create a pack of 20 tracks of music. You can put it up there, and typically in a theme or a style, put it up there and sell it and see. I see a lot of these different companies or groups of people selling, like they have 10 of them on here, and they probably making at least something off of it. So definitely check out Unity. Unity3D.com. It is available on Xbox, PlayStation, PC, Mac, iOS, Android. It's basically, again, like all the other software, you can use it for any platform that you want. It's set the game up once, and it can work on multiple different platforms. It does use a version of Fmod, but by itself, like default, but it's like behind the software. It's like you don't even see it as Fmod. But it can use Fmod Studio and Wise, the two pieces of software that I showed earlier. Then there is the Unreal Engine. The Unreal Engine has been, like as I mentioned before, very popular for a lot of very high-end games for quite a while. And they made a lot of very popular games over the years, and then realized that they had a set of tools that they could sell to other companies to make their games. And so the Unreal Engine has probably been the most popular third-party game engine out there available. It is freely available for you to download. I've chosen not to use it for our game projects because it's quite heavy. It runs very, very powerful games, so it's very powerful software. It takes a pretty large install, and it can make our laptops sweat pretty hard. It can push the processing power very, very hard. So it's not, Unity is kind of a lighter game engine overall. And it works out because it was initially meant for more mobile games and still has that history to it. So the games run, I can assume that the games are going to run a little bit more smoothly on our laptops through the Unity engine. But you can definitely download and check out the Epic, from the Epic website, the Unreal Engine. That looks like, where'd it go? Looks like this. And so these are some of the games and things that it's showing off in the background. The Batman games, the Street Fighter games. I don't even know what that game is. Oh, that looks like Paragon. Works on all these different platforms. They're pushing virtual reality. I mean, they've just got some really, really high-end stuff. Actually, let me see if I can find it. I just found this today. State of the Unreal Engine. Yeah, they just released a really cool video about the Unreal Engine, about what they're doing it in 2016. It was used in Rogue One, Star Wars story. That kind of lends to the idea that it was very, very heavy, very, very powerful processing. They use it to generate like cars in TV commercials. They use it in live broadcasts and stage shows and lots of games, lots and lots of games. So it's pretty widely used software out there. If you get a chance, you can definitely check this. Check out some of what it's capable of doing. Marketplace, can you get on there? There's also, yeah, a marketplace here that sells different assets. And there is a sound effects and music section. So people making music and selling them for different prices, which is pretty interesting approach. Just another means to sell your music out there. And you can download games. Let's see, categories, projects, community samples. Yeah, you can download game projects. This one looks absolutely gorgeous. This is free to download, and it's an environment to you can make music and sound for. You could probably, I'm sure you could navigate that around in 3D. So really, really cool stuff. Available for free. There are tutorials, there are game projects. They all need audio and sound. I often tell people that are interested in checking this stuff out, create a demo project that you can show off to different game companies. Show yourself recording the sound, show yourself in the DAW, creating the music and creating the audio. Show yourself in the game tools like Fmod and Wise, and then the Unreal Engine and the Unity Engine, and you've got an amazing demo to show off what you're capable of doing with all of this software. So some very interesting stuff out there. Again, the original license and the full license could be upwards of $500,000. But they have a current pricing scheme. Let's see if it still is the same. Oh, did I close that? Let's go. There it is. Unreal Engine. Let's see. About. Oh, they don't have a price on here. Let's see. Overview. How much? Not cheap. There it is. Use for free. Pay 5% when you ship. So they are going for a straight 5% cut of your profits, which is an interesting way of going about it. But instead of doing that, some companies just take a flat rate, which can be many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for the free guys, it's just a little cut. For the small games, it can either be free or a really small percentage. Or for the bigger companies, they kind of scale up from there. Free for educational purposes, for our non-commercial reasons, we can completely dive into it and get access to it. So available on all these different platforms, and uses a system called Microsoft X Audio 2. Epic Games and Microsoft have been buddy-buddy for quite a while. Epic Games did Gears of War, which was a Xbox exclusive, and then Microsoft has taken over and done the new Gears of War 4 that's coming out. And so they use a lot of Microsoft tools like X Audio 2, but you just see it inside the audio software, and integrates with Fmod, Studio, and Wise also, so you can use some of the third-party tools. So, like I said, your game engine's sort of like your DAW, in that by itself it can do 80 or 90 or even 100% of what you actually need to get done, but with the default audio system, but it can integrate with tools like Fmod and Wise to give you extra functionality, just like a plugin. So that gives you some insight into some of the technology and tools that are used in the process of getting your music working in game. All the software that we talked about is free. I highly encourage you to download and check it out, to check out some of the tutorials, check out some of the demos, and find other games that you can take and put your own audio and music and sound effects into. So if you have any questions about technology, or you want to get started with any of the software, or certainly if you have any questions about the class or the project, please let me know. Otherwise, have a good afternoon, and I will see you again on next Tuesday. Thanks a lot.